Steve Kaufman's title, CAO. Apparently that stands for Chief Acceleration Officer, but it could just as well stand for Chief Audacity Officer, because Stephen Kaufman at ZeusCrowdfunding.com actually guarantees the investments on his site. If you only listen to one of my podcasts, listen to this one. Stephen is unique, and his story is absolutely fascinating. Welcome to the National Real Estate Forum.org podcast, episode 235. Hey, thanks for joining me today. I'm Dr. Adam Gower, and this is the National Real Estate Forum.org, where I speak to the leaders of the crowdfund real estate industry so that you can learn how to raise capital, build wealth, and earn passive income from crowdfund real estate deals. When I first got into real estate investing in the early 1980s in San Diego, California, my job was to raise capital from investors, primarily in Japan. I discovered that I had a knack for it, raising over 30 million in 1980s money, while I was still just in my early 20s. One of the first lessons that I learned was never to guarantee anything, never even use the word guarantee. Especially don't use the word. I can't remember exactly how it came up, but I probably must have said something along the lines of, you will get an 8% pref and a 20% return, or whatever it was that we were projecting, right? I must have given the impression we were guaranteeing it. Anyway, it was made clear to me that the terminology that I must use, or should use, had to be equivocal, meaning that I had to be clear that these were projections, and that there remained a risk of loss, and that past performance was no guarantee of future results, right? Anyway, for the rest of my career, I've always been really careful about that. So I was really super delighted to speak to Stephen Kaufman at ZeusCrowdfunding.com, who does guarantee against loss when you invest in debt on his platform, right? I love this contrarian approach, and I'm not even going to try to explain it for him, as he does such an excellent job, as you'll hear in today's podcast. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's the only one out there. So go ahead, take the Gower challenge, right? I'm sure Stephen won't mind. I've compiled a list of every single real estate crowdfunding site out there, and I put it up at the show notes page for today's episode at the National Real Estate Forum.org website, nreforum.org/Zeus, so that you can check all of the other sites against Zeus and let me know if there is anyone else that offers a guarantee. I'm pretty sure that there isn't. And again, I still hesitate to say I guarantee there isn't, right? Anyway, here is Stephen Kaufman. He is one of the most fascinating and accomplished guys in the real estate industry today. Fascinating story. ZeusCrowdfunding.com. I don't want to say any more. Stephen Kaufman.
Education-wise, I have a master's degree in economics. I completed Harvard's strategic marketing management program, and I am a PhD candidate at the Chicago School. I'm about two-thirds of the way through, or somewhere between a third and two-thirds of the way through my dissertation on organizational leadership.
Wow, very cool.
Hopefully by the end of this year, or early next year, I'll be Dr. Kaufman, Dr. Stephen Kaufman. So,
all right, good.
So that's a little bit about my education. I'm a lifelong learner. In fact, when people ask me my number one hobby, I always tell them that it is learning and education. And regarding, so dating myself, just the background how I ended up as the founder of Zeus is that I'm also a CPA. I'm not practicing, but I am licensed. And in my early days, I went to school at night, finishing my accounting degree, and I worked in public accounting during the day. And this was when Bill Clinton was president, so dating myself just a little bit, though I'm not that old. And while this was happening, Bill Clinton is the first president to recognize that in the United States, GDP is sourced 18 to 22% from real estate. So said another way, somewhere between 18 to 22 cents of every dollar made in this country is made in the real estate industry. And he realized that if there was one segment that he could easily influence it, industry by making financing a lot more available. So he started pressuring Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to lower their down payment requirements from the 20% down to the 10%, down to the 5%, down to the 0. So much of what you think is the mortgage crisis of 2008 really started in the late 90s. And that economic experience that we had that was so positive was really a part of that. So during that time, I happened to be a student at night and working during the day in public accounting, which means my firm where I worked, this is the long story, or this is the short story, it can get longer, but the short story is the firm where I worked ended up getting mortgage companies and mortgage banks as clients, and I ended up, because I was a real estate investor in my early 20s, I owned 3 rental properties by the time I was 21 years old, and I've never inherited anything other than a little bit of medical debt and funeral expenses, and and so I don't come from money. I grew up incredibly poor. In fact, a lot of people who know my true story know that I grew up in a trailer park, and I grew up about 80% of my life until I was in high school. I did not have electricity. I did not have a telephone. My mother made my clothes, and she gave us IOUs for our birthdays and most holidays. So,
are you serious? That's really true, Stephen? That's incredible.
That's very true. And so in the 9th grade, going back to education a little bit, but also tying it all together, in the 9th grade, I have 4 older siblings. None of them graduated high school. So I figured I would do what they all did, which is I dropped out of high school in the 9th grade, and I went to work like them, because that's what you did where I grew up, in a trailer park. Everyone went to work. And then sometime around age 17, I realized that if I have to do something. I must do something different than everyone else around me, or I'm going to end up just like everyone else around me. And so, as I like to say, I drug myself to work. I drug myself to school. I drug myself to the bank to save money. I drug myself to volunteering. I started dragging myself to all these places that I felt that everyone else in my neighborhood, in my trailer park, wouldn't do, so that I could have a life that they wouldn't have.
That's very clever.
And I've been doing it ever since. So
all right, good.
And so now circa 2001, I am working in public accounting, and I decide that maybe I should consult in the mortgage industry or lending industry. And during that entire process, working for a few clients, I decided to start my own firm. And I called it Zeus because Zeus is the god of all the gods in Greek mythology, and we could simply be the god of all gods in the lending space. And that's where it started about 15 years ago. And it's been an amazing ride. Lots of great people making a lot of difference for people.
Okay, so you started the company 15 years ago. How did the company change as a result of the Jobs Act regulations?
So Jobs Act helped in a major way because we were doing hard money lending prior to the Jobs Act. And prior to that, if you said the word hard money, you were, even though it was a great tool that a lot of investors loved and used, and the Jobs Act did something really miraculous. It's kind of like, the war on drugs, or making the estate tax the death tax, or, changing global warming to climate change. Or in the 80s, they had variable rate mortgages, and now they were called ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. All of these name changes have a dramatic impact on consumers as a whole. And so when you introduced the Jobs Act, you took crowdfunding, which is basically sourcing investments for real estate from different individuals and opening up the opportunity to do transactions that a traditional bank wouldn't do. Well, that's called hard money in the real estate industry, and it's been a product for 30 years or more. And it really transformed our ability to market mainstream a product that we were kind of keeping in the shadows. And so we launched a few years ago ZeusCrowdfunding.com, which, if you didn't know, last year was ranked the 7th best site in the country and the number 1 news site in the country for real estate for investors in crowdfunding real estate. And a big part of that's because of our commitment to transparency. And what it really did, to just answer your question succinctly, and I know this is a long answer, but succinctly, it allowed us to move hard money with a slight name change into, center stage and market it in a way that people
capitalized before the Jobs Act. How did you fund the loans that you were making?
Great question.
And then how did that change?
Yeah, great question. A lot less than you would think, but the changes are significant. They're small shifts, but they've had a major impact. And I know this is somewhat of a leading question. I thank you for asking me it because I skipped over it. In short, prior to the Jobs Act, when we funded a loan, we funded it with our own capital. And then we sought out individual investors that we knew, friends and family and acquaintances that may want to invest in that loan one at a time to only accredited investors. Very, very slow, tedious process. And then literally overnight, we were able to, thanks to the Jobs Act, put that transaction on a website, ZeusCrowdfunding.com, under our review investment section, and then investors all over the globe, including Singapore, are able to see the deal and invest in it after we've already funded it. So it made our job to solicit for funds so much easier that, ironically, what used to be our number one problem, which is getting investor capital, now we do not even think about it. It is so overrun that we can't, we've raised our minimums. We can't handle the amount of people who want to invest with us. So, and that's not a plug. We really cannot. What we now have an issue of is getting deals. So to satisfy their appetite.
My new book, Leaders of the Crowd, published by Palgrave Macmillan, is available for pre-order on Amazon. It's a fascinating chronicle of how crowdfund real estate came to be. Pre-order your copy today at leadersofthecrowd.com. That's really interesting. So I'll tell you what, let's spin back a little bit and put some dates on it, if you will, Stephen. What was the actual process for making that shift for you? I mean, how did you put these two things together? The Jobs Act, which was designed to finance small companies, and you connected it with raising capital online to fund your deals. How did you make that connection? And then what was the initial process by which you actually explored how to do it and then implemented it?
Great. Okay, got it. First of all, the way we found out about real estate crowdfunding, I didn't even know that the Jobs Act had been passed, and I didn't even know about real estate crowdfunding until a friend of mine who's an avid real estate investor asked me to vet a site where he was going to invest in some transactions online. And this is by far, without a doubt, one of the top 10 sites in the country. And when we looked at the deal closely together, he asked for my underwriting expertise, and we like to say that at our firm we're good at two things. Number one, by far, is risk assessment through underwriting, and number two is marketing, as in giving our customers, borrowers, and investors what they really want. Those are the two things we're good at. Those are the two things we're good at and great at. Well, he knew that I'm, because of my accounting background and some of the things that I've done in my career, that I would have a good eye for this. And so we looked at the deal and we thought, well, this is a terrible deal. But more importantly, I thought, how are they able to ask you for money? They don't even know you. Which part of that, you had to be going through the accreditation process and everything else. And so we explored their site and we read about the Jobs Act. I'd never learned about it before. I'd never heard it in mainstream media. And this was probably, 5 years ago. And I really thought that I saw that this is going to be a place where, if you can, with peer-to-peer business growing dramatically across the globe, when you think about Uber or you think about Airbnb, I mean, Uber is not going to shut down all car services or taxis, but it is making a meaningful dip. Airbnb is not going to shut down Marriott, but it's taking a meaningful dip of their business. I feel the same way about crowdfunding for real estate debt. We're not going to shut down the banks, but what we are going to do is make a meaningful difference, a meaningful dip in their market share. So the way I tied them together is I saw what another crowdfunding site was doing. I was already doing that, but doing it the hard way. And I realized that we could create our own platform, make it a little bit better, and offer the same product, but just make it a little bit better.
All right. So how did you make that jump then? Because prior to that, you were, as you mentioned, you were going to people that you know, and you were saying, hey, look, I just financed this deal. Do you want a piece of it? Right. So that was face to face and very personal. They knew you, they liked you, they trusted you. Tell me about the process of actually discovering or figuring out how to do that online.
So really, we knew that we needed a place to do that and a portal to do that. We knew that we needed a web presence, so we created the website. And the how to know how to do that, we could do that was just simply from reading the Jobs Act and reading what was permissible. So anybody listening to your podcast or your interview can read the Jobs Act, and it's written in reasonably straightforward terms. We read that, and we knew that we needed a website, and we needed a website that had enough disclaimer that let investors know that they are at risk of losing their investment if they do a non-guaranteed investment. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we are one of the only sites in the country to offer guaranteed investments through our 15-year corporate guarantee. So we very rarely actually make non-guaranteed investments. Almost all of our investments are guaranteed, which means if something happens to the asset, we still pay the investor, we foreclose, repurpose it, and the investor is never negatively impacted at all. We were just highly discouraged. We were even mocked once in an interview that we were doing that by another platform, but it's our model. We've funded almost $3 billion in mortgages, and the only investor that might complain might be that we aren't fast enough or we don't have enough deal flow. So when did
you start doing the guarantees, Stephen?
We have never since 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, prior to the existence of the company. When I was making loans prior to the existence of Zeus as an entity, before I founded the company, I was making loans. And if I had to bring in an investor to help me recycle my cash to do it, so I could do more loans, I would tell them, look, my new company will guarantee this. And we'll go ahead.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. So let's drill down on that a little bit. So confident enough that if you had to foreclose and take it back, that you would be able to make up the difference. Is that correct? Is that a decent summary?
No, you're very close, but that's not the thesis. I use this example. If you're going for heart surgery or heart procedure, you always ask for a second opinion, right? Because you want to know if there's someone else has a different view of what's happening. But when you get on an airplane, you never even ask 1 second for the resume or the experience of the pilot or the co-pilot, right? And the reason why is because on the heart surgery, if something goes wrong, you stay there, but he gets up and goes back home to his family that night and nothing impacted him other than he's regretful. But the pilot, that he and the co-pilot, you don't have to ask for their resume because if the plane goes down, you all go down. So in our business model is that we're partners with our investor to the point that we're confident in what we're doing. We want to give them the reassurance that we're pilot in what we're doing. We want to give them the reassurance that we're pilots with you on this. We're not heart surgeons. You're not taking all the risk, and we're just getting to slice and dice wherever we think is appropriate. We're in it together. And if you think about it another way, if you're really confident in your underwriting, why wouldn't you guarantee it? And then a third element is I'm already putting my own money in the deal up front anyway. So no investor ever sees a deal on our platform ever that we haven't first lent our money unless it's listed as non-guaranteed. So I'm so confident in the transaction, I've already given my own cash. So I've already underwritten it with my team. My underwriter who works here, my first 2 employees from 15 years ago still work here. And my underwriter is one of them, my senior underwriter. And if she says, if we're going to do the transaction based on our matrix and our underwriting criteria, and we fund it folio, we've funded, why would we not guarantee it to an investor?
All right. So, of course, now it begs the question. I was at a major bank during the downturn. Actually, I was brought in by a major bank during the 2008-2009 downturn and saw, hundreds of billions of distressed real estate. So tell me, how did your platform weather that storm? What did you do, and how did you guarantee? How did you deal with that? Tell me about that. It's extremely interesting.
Great question. We have a less than 1% default rate on our portfolio. We've never had a down year in our portfolio. And even though we did it's not a matter of if, it's when you're going to take back an asset if you're in this space. That's not the issue. In order for us to survive and even do a little bit of thriving through the recession, which we like cyclical. On a full scale, this industry does better. It's counter-cyclical. It does better when banks retract and the economy contracts. People need alternative financing. So that's what we do. One of our products is that we're talking about. So on one hand, you could say, well, we were potentially losing deals because property values were dropping. On the other hand, you could say, well, we were gaining market share because of the amount of business we were doing. I will tell you, in 2008, the entire year, we only took back 5 transactions. And of those 5 transactions, 3 of them we sold within probably 3 to 4 months, and we were made whole or made a profit. 2 of them we had to hold for another year and a half. When that happened, we gave the investor the option: do you want us to pay you off and keep the asset, or do you want us to continue just to pay you as we were paying you before? And I don't remember the exact result, but I can tell you that we ended up, when we sold the assets about a year and a half, give or take later, we made somewhere in the low 20 IRR in our money, net of what we had to pay to the investor. So we came out very ahead on the transactions, and we were happy to have maintained them. So the real question is, do you have the staying power to do that based on your portfolio? And so a small lender who guarantees them, they're guaranteeing them because they probably can't get the money anywhere else. But our company has no debt. We manage all of our own service and manage all of our own assets, and we're perfectly positioned to repurpose based on the foundation of the company. You know, one other thing that we do is invest in assets, and so we're not a home investors franchise. We don't actively buy residential property, but we do a few commercial projects a year where we develop, and more what I call mom and pop commercial real estate, which is, $10 million or less. So we understand what it's like to take back a property and how to repurpose it. We prefer to only be in the lending business when we do a loan to lend on it, but we understand if a property has to be taken back, what to do with it. That was a long walk, but I got you there.
It was an extremely pleasant walk. All right. So what are the biggest challenges then that you face today? You mentioned having too little product. Why is that? And what do you think is going to change, or how do you deal with that kind of situation?
Yeah, I think that the biggest, I'll call it threat, but it's not really a threat, is interest rate compression or margin compression in the crowdfunding and hard money space. It's very attractive, or was really attractive, a few years ago. But with interest rates rising and investors expecting a good yield, coupled with a lot of competition in the crowdfunding and hard money lending space, means that there's compression to margins that any real player could not ignore. Everyone's trying to offer a cheaper option. Well, while everyone's doing that, interest rates are rising, so the cost of funds is going up. So your cost of your product's going up, but you're having to lower your price to get more business. And now, a good sign that there really is an economic cycle looming in the near or very near future, but probably near future, not very near, is that everybody thinks they can be a hard money lender or a crowdfunding lender right now with no lending or underwriting experience at all. So it's a little bit ironic, just a little bit, that the one thing that you really need to be good at is underwriting. When you're making a loan, you have to be able to assess risk, right? Is the one thing that most of the people who are entering the space don't have any experience with. They're technology guys, or they have a really decent size retirement account that they've assembled, or, it's great when prices are rising. But managing that risk when prices are not rising is a real problem. So I see two issues, biggest challenges. I see one going on right now, which is the margin compression or pricing compression, where everyone is lowering their rates to get business, and rising interest rates. So the cost of funds are going up. So that is definitely impacting the business. It's also impacting deal flow because everyone wants to be in the industry. I think the second issue isn't here now, but it will be here in the next economic cycle, that a lot of these loans were made by people who just they're smart people, not undermining their intelligence. And they even hired smart people to underwrite for them, but they have not been in this space before. And there's a reason why it's called non-traditional lending or alternative lending. And it's because it is associated with a high degree of risk that I don't think a lot of people have assessed the way that they probably should have. And we can jump the way that they probably should have. And we can jump on any crowdfunding site you want right now, the top 10 crowdfunding sites in the country. And I'm sure I can pick out one deal in only about 5 minutes on the website that I could point out 10 reasons why a bank wouldn't do this, and more importantly, no surprise there, why other crowdfunding sites wouldn't do it who are more established, and that this was probably a risky loan because it's non-guaranteed, and it's to satisfy an appetite for investors to get high yields.
So what do you think? What are the the kind of the top three things that you see that are critical failures? Do you think made by novices or people that don't have the kind of experience that you do?
I don't know if there's any one particular area other than I don't know of a particular trend that I see one way or the other because I don't have the data to say that. In 2010, one of the things about was, excuse me, how could we predict a foreclosure if 2008 was so devastating and we really weren't that devastated? What was it about our loans compared to others that were different that made us not have as many losses? And so we developed something called the Z score, Z as in Zeus. It's a risk factor. It's an algorithm, otherwise known as a fancy Excel spreadsheet, that is used to assess risk of a transaction. And the various items of a borrower and a property are assessed based on certain weighted averages and a couple of other formulas to determine what is the likelihood of default. And then during that time, we plugged in about 5,000 of our own transactions. And since then, it's been more than 10,000 transactions that we plugged into our own algorithm to assess whether this loan will or will not go into default. And when we do have a loan that goes into default, we always see how did the algorithm miss that? What was missed? I can't tell you what everyone else is missing because I don't have access to their underwriting and their portfolios.
That's really interesting, Stephen. So what are the key drivers that you think drive your algorithm? When you tweak something, what really moves the needle the most? Or what are the 2 or 3 things that are the most important things then that you look at in a loan?
I think everyone knows this, but you'll see a lot of sites who will ignore it now. Credit is short for credibility, and if someone isn't paying anyone else, they're not going to pay you, especially when going gets tough. The going gets tough, and we don't just look at credit score; we look at credit history. So we want to see a trailing history of credit and credit payments. Someone who's 18 can have a 720 credit score, 750 credit score, and someone who's 88 can have a 750 credit score. But neither one of them have very good trailing credit accounts, and they have those scores because they have no credit. So I think that's probably one that's most misunderstood, and I'm barely scratching the surface on that. And the opposite direction is that we don't pay attention the way a lot of lenders do to income, because we feel like we can underwrite income based on credit differently than a lot of other lenders. Credit tells us more. Credit history tells us more. And when we look at a 10-year trailing history and telling your trailing credit profile, we can tell you, we don't need to know your income to know that you pay all your bills, or who you will pay and who you won't bill over the last 10 years. You could lie or fib or rig things for a year or two, but you're probably not doing that over a 10-year period of your life. And so pretty much we have a pretty good snapshot over 10 years of whether we're going to get paid or not, and who you're not going to pay, and so forth. So we don't actually need to look at income the same way a lot of lenders do. And a lot of lenders they'll look at reserves, but they don't even know, they don't really even know why they're not looking at it. They just don't. They're mainly doing that so they can get deal flow. Because again, if you don't guarantee your loans, your whole business model is to make as many loans as possible, because you don't make loans. I mean, you don't guarantee your loans. So to you, making a loan that looks good but may not be good isn't your number one concern. Your number one concern is churning loans out on the site as fast as possible. That's not ours, because we want to make very conservative loans that we know will perform over the long term, even if there is an issue.
What is your financial model? How do you make money? Do you take a spread on the interest rate, or is it fees, or how do you do that? And how does the investor? Yes, explain that relationship between you and the sponsor or the borrower, and then also with the investor.
We make fees on both sides, depending on the transaction. So we make fees that transactional fees when we're doing a loan, and possibly points.
Well, hang on. What's the difference between
we make fees that transactional fees when we're doing a loan, and possibly points.
Well, hang on. What's the difference between transactional fees and points then to a borrower?
Well, if there's a third party to a borrower, if there's a fee that we have to pay for a verification, we're not charging you that cost. We're charging you plus a margin. If something costs us $25, we're charging you $75.
Okay.
Same thing your dentist does when he's cleaning your teeth. If he's charging you for, some brush that he just opens to help you, to do their job, they're not charging you the cost of that brush that they bought at wholesale. They're charging you more. Same idea. And then there's a possibility to make some points, but we also share points with our investors.
Okay.
And then the spread between the rates based on what our deal flow, we either pay investors more or less based on what that will look like. If we need more business, we'll pay more. If we need less business, we'll pay less any sort of transactional fees at all. So our investors do not pay a fee; they only earn money. We write checks to them; they never write checks to us. We don't take any piece of what they're earning. We don't charge them any servicing fees, any reporting fees, anything. What they're quoted as their rate, that's it, net and gross.
Let me paraphrase what I think you just said. The margin between what you charge the borrower and what you pay investors depends on the state of the market, right? Or the cycle, or whether you need more investors or you need more borrowers. So you adjust that accordingly. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's a lever that we can move up and down as we need.
And then you also pay a different rate to people that take guaranteed loans versus, on the same deal, non-guaranteed positions.
We almost don't. We have never mixed a loan for guaranteed and non-guaranteed borrowers in the same transaction. We've talked about it and we could do it. We just don't do it. We haven't had a need to do it.
Interesting. So everybody. Oh, I see. So you have some. So what is the difference then? What makes a loan guaranteed versus non-guaranteed? You did allude to this earlier, but tell me a little bit more about how that happens.
If we don't want to pre-fund a transaction, that is sometimes considered non-guaranteed. Or if it's outside of our box that we would typically put on our site, but we know investors have asked us during our interviewing process or our follow-up process that they'd like a certain type of transaction or they have a tolerance for a certain type of transaction, even though it's not in our normal box, we can still underwrite that. But it's just not something that we typically would do, and we try to stick to the knitting with a great amount of laser focus on what we do and do well. And if we don't do it well, we usually will laser focus on what we do and do well. And if we don't do it well, we usually will refer that out. But if a borrower insists on working with us, which does happen because they were referred or they have used us in the past, but they want to do a transaction that we've not done before. Or not done before, but we don't want to do, I should say, then we will offer it as a non-guaranteed product. But frankly, we very rarely do a non-guaranteed loan.
It's an extremely interesting model that you have. Stephen, where do you see the market evolving, or how do you see the market evolving over the next few years, and what do you think will happen during the next downturn for the kind of general industry, but also for your company? Yeah.
Don't quote me on this one, but I would suspect that in the next 3 to 5 years that hard money lenders and crowdfunding lenders are going to have some sort of licensing. Right now, they're pretty much exempt from any sort of lending licensing because of the property type. And I think that you're going to see who are dealing with borrowers and investors capital. I mean, right now, anyone can create a crowdfunding site. Anyone can lend on it, say they're going to lend on it, and anyone can take someone's retirement money, even though they have no underwriting experience, and lend it on a transaction and not guarantee it and just get fees for doing it. And yes, should that investor know better before they put their money on that website? Yeah, but people should know better driving a car 60 miles an hour on the freeway and not wear their seatbelt, but they do it all the time. So I see the industry being a lot more regulated in the future, and I think that'll happen either as we're entering or just through the other side of a cycle. And I see massive consolidation in the industry. I think you're going to see it's going to look like the cell phone industry. You'll have the big 3 to big 5 who will be dealing with each other, shutting everyone else out, and it will be difficult to compete.
Why? In what way difficult? You mean to compete with?
Who will be dealing with each other, shutting everyone else out, and it will be difficult to compete.
Why? In what way difficult? You mean to compete with the big 3 or the big 5?
Yeah, I mean, if you're to compete with Verizon, Sprint, or AT&T or T-Mobile or let's just say the big 3, Verizon, Sprint, and AT&T, no one's launching a cell phone company, even if they have the resources. Why? Because those 3 have so much. Like every industry, there's so much competition between the 3 of them that there's very little room to get inside without any new innovation or technology. you're basically getting yourself into a cat fight, and this is not. I'm just using them as an example. You see the same thing that's happened in the airline business. Unless you have some very, very unique model that you can launch, pretty much it's who can offer a lower fare, and that's the business model. So I think you're going to see the same industry. In fact, if you look at the lifeline or life cycle of this industry, it's going to happen a lot quicker than most because it has so much attention. I mean, you have your podcast based off of it. KKR is entering the space. Goldman's into the space. I mean, everyone wants to be in the space. Fruitful. And they have a lot more economies of scale, and they have a much lower cost of funds than I do. So there's going to be, I think you're going to see incredible consolidation. That's not all bad news. If you launch a site now and it's successful, you might be acquired. So I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying if that happens after the next economic cycle, it could be bad because you might go out of business. But I think in the next cycle or through it, you'll see a lot of consolidation.
As a real estate guy, what are the key daily habits that you have to make you and your business successful?
I do two things before noon that I don't want to do.
Do you really? That's really cool. I've heard that actually said a different way. One of my guests said, I eat a frog for breakfast. And I asked him, what does that mean exactly? And you said it exactly the same thing in a different way. All right, question number 2, right?
Yeah.
What has been the hardest lesson you've learned in real estate?
That you have to use fear as a guide and not as a roadblock.
Okay, I didn't quite hear the word. You have to use what?
Fear, being afraid.
You did say that, yeah.
Fear
what?
As a guide and not as a roadblock.
So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Fear, the people who are fearless die or go bankrupt. People who are risk adverse and use fear as a roadblock, move
as a guide,
forward.
you mean?
No, as a roadblock, move slower and are cautious because they're afraid or have fear that they're going to make the wrong move, and they're usually trailing the market and they're usually late to the party. But those who use fear as a guide, as buoys, as a guardrail, to guide them within the right parameters but still move forward and proceed even though they are worried or concerned, that is the hardest lesson I've had to learn. Because you leave a lot on the table time-wise. When the going's good, when the going's good, you've got to use that fear to guide you to proceed. And then at the same time, when the going's bad or you have a bad gut feeling, you have to use that fear to slow you down. But it can never be a roadblock to, stop you from moving at all. Or to moving too slowly, more, including yours truly, if I were just continuously using fear as a guide to keep proceeding.
Interesting. So you use it as a roadblock to slow you down.
I have used it. That's not what I'm advising. You said, what's the number one lesson? The lesson is use it as a guide, not as a roadblock. Fear is a guide. It's not a roadblock.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, final question. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody who has not yet invested in real estate, let's say on a crowdfunding real estate platform, but is considering investing, what would that advice be?
It is self-serving, but I would tell you if they won't guarantee your investment, then they're not very confident in it.
It's fairly self-serving. You're the only person I've never heard of anybody guaranteeing an investment in any capacity. Anybody guaranteeing an investment in any capacity.
It's a 60 to 70% investment. I have a 30 to 40% margin of error. If I'm wrong, I have 40%. I only have to be 60% correct. So my job's to be greater. If I'm 80% correct on my underwriting, that means I have a 20% buffer against my margin of error. If I'm 90% correct on my underwriting, I have a 20 to 30% buffer against anything that could happen. So it's nothing but math on my side.
That was Steve Kaufman of ZeusCrowdfunding.com, figuring that even if a deal goes south, he's got enough leeway to be able to take it back and still keep investors whole. It's a fascinating approach, and as far as I know, it really is unique in the industry. Together, of all the sites, I'm pretty sure it's a complete list of all the sites out there currently. Go to the show notes page for today's episode at the National Real Estate Forum.org website, nreforum.org/Zeus, and let me know, is there anyone other than Zeus that guarantees the investments you make on their site? Really an amazing story. On the show notes page, actually, you'll also find a transcript of the show there and some links to Zeus and more information on Stephen. My next guest is Lynn Smith of Buy the Block. Buy the Block is one of the very few funding portals that are set up under regulation crowdfunding, or Reg CF, under the Jobs Act of 2012. Lynn is a member of and regulated by FINRA and can sell deals to accredited and non-accredited investors. It's an arduous process to be a Reg CF funding portal, and I'm sure that you will find Lynn's story of great interest. Be sure not to miss that episode by subscribing to the series at the National Real Estate Forum.org website, nreforum.org, and hitting any of the links that I've included about halfway down the homepage. Hey, really, thanks for tuning in and spending your time with me today. And thank you also to Steve Kaufman of ZeusCrowdfunding.com for sharing your time with all of us today. Until next time, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off.